The sound hit before the pain did. A fist connecting with a jaw sharp, brutal and obscenely loud, cracked through the marble corridors of Seoul's Latte Premium Mall like a thunderclap wrapped in silk. Sophia's head snapped sideways, her voluminous dark curls whipping across her face as her designer sunglasses launched into the air in a slow, almost cinematic arc. Her black leather handbag followed, its contents scattering across the gleaming floor in a cascade of gold and glass, a tube of lipstick rolling toward a holiday display, her phone skidding beneath a rack of fur-trimmed coats worth more than most people's cars. She stumbled. Her shoulder struck a towering Christmas arrangement, sending a shower of gold ornaments raining down around her feet like tiny, glittering warnings. For exactly one heartbeat, Seoul's most exclusive shopping corridor went completely silent. Sophia pressed one hand against the cold marble pillar beside her and forced herself upright. Her jaw throbbed. Her eyes watered. Not from weakness, never from weakness, but from the sheer animal shock of a pain she had not felt in 3 years. She looked up. Marcus Webb stood over her, gold chain gleaming against the open collar of his tailored black suit, his face arranged in the precise expression she remembered, that particular sneer he wore when he believed he had already won. He was broader now, more expensive looking. The business associates flanking him shuffled back half a step, their discomfort barely concealed behind practiced blankness. "You have some nerve," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a hiss that still managed to carry. He straightened his cuffs, looked her up and down with the lazy contempt of a man who had never once been truly afraid of anything. "Showing your face in a place like this. After everything." He laughed, short and humorless. "You're still a charity case, Sophia. You always were." He had no idea. He had no idea that the woman trembling against that pillar, the woman he had left broken and penniless on the steps of a Mapogu courthouse 3 years ago, the woman who had once counted subway tokens and rationed instant ramen and wept into a cracked bathroom mirror in a gaziwan the size of a closet, was gone. That woman was dead. He didn't know about the 61st floor penthouse suite she had woken up in that morning, its floor-to-ceiling windows bleeding gold light over the Han River. He didn't know about the matte black titanium card nestled inside the plain leather bag now appended at her feet, the one with no credit limit, because there was no number in Seoul large enough to require one. He didn't know about the slim platinum band resting against her ring finger beneath the sleeve of her dress, engraved on the inside with a single line in Korean. "My. Mine." And most critically, most fatally, Marcus Webb had no idea about the man whose name now sat like a fortress wall around hers. He didn't notice the 4 figures in charcoal suits who had, in the span of 6 seconds, silently sealed every exit of this wing of the mall. He didn't see the security monitor in the operations room 3 floors above them flare red, code black. Queen compromised. Location: Wing C Level 2. The alert detonating across 14 phones simultaneously. He didn't feel the elevator behind him open. He didn't see the man who stepped out of it, tall, unhurried, his black coat falling open over a steel gray shirt, his jaw set and his dark eyes crossing the length of the corridor in one long predatory sweep until they found her face. Until they found the mark already rising on her jaw. Yeejun Park did not run. Men like Yeejun did not run. They simply arrived, and the air around them changed temperature. As Sophia's pulse stuttered and Marcus continued his speech, something about dignity, something about knowing her place. A single vibration buzzed against her hip. Her phone, somehow still intact on the floor beside her. The screen read one word. Coming. Marcus Webb had not slapped an ex-wife today. He had just signed his own erasure. And in exactly 60 seconds, everything he had ever built was going to cease to exist. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 2,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to 2000 and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now let's continue. The morning had started without violence. Most mornings now. The sun came up slowly over the Han River, spreading itself in pale amber sheets across the glass face of the building, flooding the bedroom in the kind of light that belonged in architecture magazines, which Sophia had learned was precisely where this penthouse had appeared twice, under the headline "Living at the Edge of the Sky." She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, the way she always did. Just sat. Her bare feet hovered above a white rug so thick it swallowed sound. The silk sheets behind her, cream hand-stitched, shipped from a workshop in Lyon that had been making linens for European royalty for 2 centuries, pooled in expensive waves against the headboard. She ran her fingers across the fabric. Even now, even after 2 years of waking up in this room, some part of her brain still waited for the rough scratch of cheap polyester. Still braced for the radiator knock of a cramped studio apartment, the sound of a neighbor's television bleeding through paper-thin walls, the particular quality of cold that budget heating could never fully defeat. The phantom sensations never fully left. That was the thing no one told you about surviving. The body kept its own memory. Sophia stood. She moved through the dressing room quietly, still quietly, always quietly, past the rows of garments that Yi-jun's stylist refreshed each season. Structured coats in charcoal and ivory. Evening gowns that had been worn to 3 state-adjacent galas and photographed by journalists who were never told whose wife she was. Silk, cashmere, Italian leather. An entire taxonomy of a life she was still learning to inhabit. She reached past all of it. At the far end of the rack, half hidden behind a cream blazer, hung a simple black dress. No logo. No architectural structure. Just clean lines and good fabric and the particular anonymity she still craved on days when the city felt too loud, too watched, too much. She dressed. She did her face with the same restrained precision she'd developed in the years when drugstore concealers had to work twice as hard for half the result. She fastened the small gold hoops to her ears, a gift from Yi-jun, given without ceremony, left on the kitchen counter one morning beside her coffee cup as though he simply wanted her to have something that caught the light. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was composed, elegant even. Her natural curls were shaped and full around her face, her skin luminous, her posture carrying the quiet authority of someone who had learned, was still learning, that she was allowed to take up space. She reached for her bag. The plain one. The modest one. She had not planned to go to the mall. She had not planned anything that would happen next. But Seoul was a city that moved whether you were ready or not, and some histories she was about to discover had not yet finished with her. 41 floors above the city, Yi-jun Park did not pace. Pacing implied anxiety. Anxiety implied weakness. And in the 12 years since he had quietly, systematically dismantled every power structure in Seoul's underground and rebuilt it under his own name, Yi-jun had learned to transform every combustible emotion into something colder, more useful, more precise. He stood instead at the wall of glass that formed the eastern face of his office, his hands clasped behind his back, and watched the city move beneath him the way a chess player watches a board, not with urgency, but with the absolute, unhurried confidence of a man who has already calculated every possible outcome and finds none of them threatening. The office itself reflected its owner. No excess. No ornamentation for its own sake. A desk of raw slate and brushed steel. Shelves holding 3 things. A single framed photograph turned face down, an encrypted satellite phone, and a jade figurine that had belonged to his grandmother and was the only object in the building he would not replace if it were destroyed. The city's most feared man kept a spare room. On the desk, a secondary monitor glowed. He did not look at it constantly. He had trained himself out of that particular compulsion in the first month of their marriage, when he'd recognized that watching her location refresh every 30 seconds was not protection, it was possession. And Sophia had survived enough of that from other men to last several lifetimes. So he had negotiated with himself. 15-minute intervals. A single glance. Enough to know she was moving, breathing safe. Enough to give her the invisible perimeter of his attention without making a cage of it. He glanced now. The blue indicator pulsed steadily over Gangnam-gu. The mall district. She had mentioned something at breakfast about wanting to walk, just walk Yi-jun without a driver, without a detail, just walk like a normal person. And he had said nothing because there were things Sophia needed that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with remembering who she was before the world broke her. He understood that. He had his own version of it. He had assigned the details anyway. For men. Plain clothes. 60-meter rotation. She didn't need to know. She needed to feel free, and he needed her to be safe, and the space between those two requirements was where Yijun Park did all his most important, most invisible work. His phone buzzed once on the desk. He didn't move immediately. A single buzz was informational. 2 buzzes was situational. 3 was 3. He crossed the room in 4 strides and picked up the phone. The message was 4 words from his head of security, a man who had once defused a political kidnapping with the effect of someone ordering lunch. Code Black. Wing C. Yijun read it once. Set the phone down. Picked up his coat from the back of his chair with the same motion a surgeon uses reaching for a scalpel. No hurry, no wasted movement, the hands simply knowing what they are about to do and doing it. The billion-dollar merger sitting open on his desk, 3 months of negotiation, 47 pages, 2 governments tangentially involved. He closed without saving. It could be rebuilt. Everything financially could be rebuilt. There was only one thing in this city that existed in a category beyond replacement, and her GPS signal was pulsing from a luxury mall in Gangnam, and something had gone wrong. He was already moving toward the elevator when the second alert arrived. He didn't read it. He already knew. Sophia had forgotten how much she loved the smell of winter in a mall. Not the cold itself. Seoul's December had a particular bite that she had never fully made peace with, but the interior version of it. The cinnamon and pine and warm sugar smell of the holiday season trapped inside somewhere bright and heated, bouncing off marble floors and high ceilings strung with gold lights. Smelled like possibility, like the version of Christmas she had constructed in her imagination as a girl, before she learned that imagination was often the only budget available for that particular holiday. She moved slowly without destination. That was the point. No driver circling the block, no itinerary, no social obligation waiting at the end of the afternoon. Just her and the noise of ordinary life and the small private pleasure of being anonymous in a crowd. She paused near a holiday display at the center of the wing. An elaborate arrangement of frosted branches, white lights, and oversized ornaments in gold and deep red. The kind of installation that required a full design team and a budget Sophia had once spent 3 months earning. She tilted her head at it, smiled a little. There was something she still loved about beautiful things that existed purely to be looked at. No function, no strategy, just light and color and the simple intention of making people feel something good. She was still looking at it when she heard the laugh. She knew it before she understood that she knew it. The body is faster than the mind in these moments. Her shoulders drew together half a second before her brain produced the name, the face, the full catalog of damage attached to both. The laugh was the same, loud in the particular way of men performing confidence for an audience. Self-congratulatory. The laugh of someone who had just said something they found very clever, and needed the room to confirm it. She turned slowly because turning quickly would have looked like what it was. Marcus stood 20 feet away near the entrance of a luxury watch boutique, flanked by 2 men in suits whose deference told her everything about the transaction they just completed. He was gesturing with one hand, a gold chain catching the light, his other hand pressed flat against the boutique window in the posture of a man who wanted everyone in the vicinity to understand that he could afford what was behind the glass. He looked successful. She had to give him that. Whatever he had built since Atlanta, since Seoul, since the courthouse steps, since the particular cruelty of abandonment dressed up as pragmatism, it had funded itself well. She turned back to the ornaments, kept her face composed, kept her breathing measured. She would simply move, take the escalator to the upper level, find the tea shop she'd noticed on the way in, wait until the wing had rearranged itself in her favor. She had taken 4 steps when she heard the laugh stop. Sophia. Not a question. Never a question with Marcus. A declaration. The verbal equivalent of a hand pressed to a shoulder. The assumption of access that had always defined his relationship to her personal space, her time, herself. She stopped. Not out of obedience, she had burned that particular reflex down to ash years ago, but because running from a ghost in a public corridor was its own kind of defeat, and Sophia had decided, once and for all, that she was done being defeated. She turned around. Marcus Webb was already walking toward her, his associates a half-step behind, his face wearing the particular expression of a man who has just discovered something he thought he'd thrown away and cannot decide whether to be amused or annoyed. "I thought that was you," he said, and smiled. She said nothing at first. That was new. The old Sophia, the one who had walked on the balls of her feet through her own home, who had apologized reflexively, chronically, for the simple fact of having needs, that woman would have filled the silence immediately. Would have smoothed it over with something placating, something small, some offering of words designed to keep the temperature in the room from rising. She let it rise. Marcus interpreted her silence the way men like him always interpreted silence from women they had once controlled. As an invitation. As proof that she was still, somewhere underneath whatever she was performing today, the same person he had left. "You look." He paused, letting his eyes move over her in that slow, appraising way she remembered like a recurring injury. "Better than I expected, honestly. Soul treating you well." He glanced back at his associates with a small, inclusive smile that made her a punchline without completing the joke. "She used to cry at subway delays," he said to them conspiratorially. "Full tears. Over a train." She had been pregnant then. She had lost it 2 weeks later. He had never known because by then he had already stopped being someone she could tell things to. "Marcus," she said. Just his name. Level and quiet. Something shifted in his face. He had expected flinching or fury, or the particular wounded dignity of someone who still cared what he thought. He had not expected this stillness, this woman standing inside her own silence like it was a room she had furnished herself and found comfortable. It irritated him. She watched it happen in real time. "What are you even doing here?" The performative pleasantness dropped a degree. "A place like this is, come on." He gestured at the mall around them, the implicit argument being the marble and the lighting and the price points and whatever story he had built about who she was and what she deserved. "You always did like to pretend." "I'm shopping," she said. "Right." He laughed. Looked at her plain dress, her modest bag, the absence of logos he could rank. "Sure." One of his associates shifted his weight. The other checked his phone. They were uncomfortable. "Good. Let them be uncomfortable. You need to understand something," Marcus said, stepping forward, dropping his voice to the register he had once used exclusively in private, the one that had no witnesses. "I have a meeting in this building in 20 minutes with people who matter in this city. Real people. And I can't have you." He stopped, exhaled through his nose, hovering around looking like some kind of... "I'm not hovering," Sophia said. "I was looking at the Christmas display. You walked toward me." The correction landed precisely where she intended. His jaw tightened. "Don't do that," he said. "Don't stand there and act like you have any ground to." "I'm going to go now," Sophia said and turned. She heard the sharp intake of breath behind her, the sound of a man whose narrative had just been interrupted, and then his hand was on her arm, spinning her back, and then there was no more sound at all, only impact, the flat crack of his fist connecting with her jaw, and the world tilted sideways and her bag left her shoulder, and somewhere above the ringing in her ears she heard the holiday music still playing. Something bright and cheerful and completely indifferent to what had just happened to her. She caught herself against the pillar, pressed her palm flat against the cold marble. 3 floors up, in a gray-walled room lined with monitors, a man in a charcoal suit watched the feed go red and reached for his radio with a hand that did not shake, because he had been trained for exactly this, because Yijun Park trained everyone around him for exactly this. "Code Black," he said, his voice flat and certain as a closing door. "The Queen has been struck. Wing C Level 2. All units move." And someone calls him. The elevator doors opened before he reached them. Someone had thought to call it up. One of his men, anticipating the direction of the next 60 seconds with the particular attentiveness that came from working in close proximity to Yijun Park for long enough to understand that when he moved with purpose, the building itself should get out of his way. He stepped in. The doors closed. His reflection looked back at him from the brushed steel interior, composed, dark-eyed, the coat settled perfectly across his shoulders, his face arranged in the expression that his associates had once privately catalogued as the quiet one, the one that was somehow worse than anger, the one that meant the decision had already been made and everything that followed was simply execution. His phone was in his hand. He dialed once. "Talk to me," he said. His head of security, Kim Jae-won, 15 years in Yi-jun's service, a man who had witnessed things that would have retired lesser operatives, delivered the facts without inflection. Male subject, approximately 185 centimeters, black suit, gold chain. Known to the queen. Ex-husband, pre-Seoul. Struck her once, open fist, jaw contact. She was upright. She was conscious. The detail had formed a perimeter. She did not yet know they were there. Yi-jun listened to all of it without interrupting. "The men he was with," Yi-jun said. "Find out who they are. Already running it. His car. His hotel if he's not local. His phone carrier. Yes. I want a complete financial profile on my screen before I reach that floor. Everything. Accounts, assets, liabilities, any debt he's servicing, any name he's borrowed money from. If he has a business registered in this city, I want to know who his landlord is." A brief pause. "It'll be ready." Yi-jun ended the call. The elevator descended. He watched the floor numbers drop and thought, with the cold clarity that had always been his most dangerous quality, about proportion, about what response was equal to this particular crime. The mathematics of consequence had always come naturally to him. It was, in many ways, the foundational skill of everything he had built. You had to understand what a thing was worth before you could determine what its violation cost. He knew what Sophia was worth. He had known it since the second month of a marriage that had begun as strategy and became, against every calculation he had ever run on himself, the one variable he could not factor out. The elevator opened on the parking level. His car was already running. His driver had the partition up before the door closed. He did not look at his phone. He looked out the window at Seoul moving past, the storefronts, the foot traffic, the ordinary machinery of a city that had no idea what was being set in motion inside one of its luxury malls this December afternoon. "When I find him," Yi-jun said quietly to no one, to the window, to the city, to whatever version of the universe was listening, "I am not going to hurt him." His driver said nothing. His driver knew better. "I am going to make him watch," Yi-jun continued, his voice dropping to something barely above a murmur. "While everything he has ever built, bought, borrowed, or stolen is reduced to nothing, I am going to take it apart piece by piece until his own name means less than the debt attached to it." He paused. "And then when there is nothing left to take, then we'll discuss what comes after." The car moved through the city like a quiet, black certainty. And somewhere in that luxury mall, Marcus Webb was still adjusting his cuffs, still performing confidence for his associates, still completely unaware that the most dangerous man in Seoul was 3 minutes away and already knew his bank account number. The mall did not announce him. That was the thing people never understood about real power. It didn't arrive with noise. Didn't need to. The motorcade stayed in the basement. The security detail was already inside, already positioned, already invisible. Yi-jun Park walked through the main entrance of Lotte Premium Mall on a December afternoon wearing a dark coat and an expression of absolute neutrality, and to the casual observer he was simply a tall, well-dressed man moving through a festive corridor with somewhere specific to be. But spaces felt him. It was something Sophia had tried to explain to her sister once in the early months, when she was still assembling language for the life she'd entered. "It's not that people recognize him," she'd said. "It's that something in the room recalibrates. Like a barometric shift. Like the air deciding to behave differently." He moved through the ground floor without looking left or right, his eyes fixed on the elevator bank ahead, his pace unhurried and absolute. Shoppers parted without knowing why. A store attendant near the entrance straightened involuntarily as he passed, some ancient social instinct responding to something it couldn't name. The elevator opened. He stepped in. Level 2. The doors opened onto Wing C, And Yijun saw her immediately, Sophia, upright against the pillar, one of his men a careful distance behind her, close enough to intervene, far enough to preserve the dignity of her not knowing she'd needed him. Her jaw. Even from here he could see the jaw. Something in his chest registered it and filed it away in the category of things to be addressed later, privately, after everything else was handled. He saw Marcus Webb 2 seconds after that. The man was still talking. Still performing. His associates had drawn slightly closer to him in the way that people cluster when they sense a shift in the atmosphere but haven't yet identified the source. Marcus himself had his back partially to the elevator, one hand gesturing, his voice carrying the slightly elevated volume of someone who had mistaken the silence around him for an audience. Yijun walked toward them at the same pace he had walked through the entrance. No acceleration. No theater. It was one of the associates who saw him first. The man's face changed in a way that faces rarely change in public, a complete involuntary collapse of social composure, the expression of someone who has just understood that the context of the last 10 minutes has been catastrophically wrong. He grabbed the arm of the man beside him. That man turned, saw, did the same thing. Then, without a word exchanged between them, both men dropped into 90-degree bows so deep and so sudden that Marcus stopped mid-sentence and turned to find his entire audience genuflecting toward someone standing behind him. He turned. Yijun had stopped walking. He stood 7 feet away, his hands at his sides, his dark eyes moving from Marcus's face with a slow, unhurried assessment of a man completing an inventory he had already largely finished from 3 minutes of financial data in a moving car. Marcus stared. His mouth opened slightly. The associates remained bowed. Neither straightened. The posture said everything that the situation had not yet said aloud. It mapped the food chain in a single sustained gesture, drew the hierarchy in real time, and placed Marcus Webb at a location within it so far below relevant that the distance almost constituted mercy. Almost. I don't, Marcus started. I know, Yijun said. His voice was quiet and even and carried the particular quality of a room with no echo. That's the problem. He looked at Sophia then. Just for a moment. The look said, I have you. I see the jaw. I see everything. We will discuss your feelings about the details later. Then he looked back at Marcus and the look changed entirely. You hit my wife, Yijun said. Not a question. Not an accusation. A fact being entered into a record. Behind Marcus, the 4 men in charcoal suits finished closing the perimeter. Marcus laughed. It was a short, reflexive sound, the kind produced not by amusement but by a nervous system scrambling for familiar ground and finding nothing. He looked at his associates, who were still bowed, who showed no indication of straightening, and the laugh died somewhere in his throat and left nothing behind it. Your wife, Marcus repeated. He said it the way a man says something he is trying to disprove by saying it aloud. His eyes moved to Sophia, then back to Yijun running some rapid, increasingly desperate calculation. I didn't. She didn't tell me she was. No, Yijun agreed. She wouldn't. He reached into his interior coat pocket and removed his phone. He did not look at it urgently. He looked at it the way a surgeon looks at a chart confirmation of what he already knew rendered in clean data. He turned the screen briefly outward so that Marcus could see the document Kim Jae-won had assembled in the car. Balance sheets. Account numbers. A lease agreement. A business registration dated 8 months ago. A credit facility extended by a mid-tier Seoul investment firm whose principal partner was. It happened 3 rungs below Yijun in a hierarchy Marcus had not known existed until approximately 90 seconds ago. You took money from her, Yijun said. He put the phone away. In Atlanta. Joint account. Cleared 4 days before the divorce was finalized. $42,000. Marcus's jaw tightened. That was illegal. Her grandmother's medical debt, Yijun continued, as though Marcus had not spoken, which she was servicing from that account, which went into default the month after you emptied it. He paused. Her credit score took 4 years to recover. She couldn't rent an apartment in her own name until she came to Seoul. The holiday music played overhead. Somewhere down the corridor, A child laughed at something in a shop window. I have no interest, Yijun said, in your explanations. I have interest only in arithmetic. He glanced toward the pillar where Sophia stood, and something in his expression shifted by a fraction. Not softness exactly, but acknowledgement, the look of a man aware that the woman he loves is watching him make a decision about how far he is willing to go. He had made the decision in the elevator. $42,000. 3 years of compounding injury. 1,000% interest, which I consider generous given today's circumstances. He removed a second phone from his coat pocket, a matte black handset that he handed to Kim Jae-won without looking. A single nod. Kim Jae-won stepped to the side and began to type. What happened next took 4 minutes. Yijun stood in place for all 4 of them, his eyes on Marcus, his expression unchanged, while the architecture of Marcus Webb's financial life was quietly, methodically, and permanently restructured. The primary sole account frozen, pending a fraud inquiry that had been filed, apparently, some minutes ago by a legal team that operated on the same anticipatory logic as the elevator. The lease on his Gangnam office space, terminated, the landlord having received and accepted a buyout figure that arrived in his account before Marcus had finished processing the freeze notification now appearing on his own screen. The investment meeting he had been preparing for, the one that had brought him to this mall, to this wing, to this holiday display, to this specific and catastrophic afternoon cancelled, the principal having received a single phone call from a number he recognized and respected above nearly all others. Marcus was looking at his phone now. His face had gone the particular gray of a man watching something he cannot stop. His business registration suspended. His company name, already being transferred, through a mechanism that required no court appearance and no appeal window, to a holding entity that would dissolve it quietly before the end of the business day. Your reputation in this city, Yijun said, will follow the money. It always does. Marcus looked up from his phone. His mouth moved without producing anything. The debt you owe my wife, Yijun said, will be collected through the firm whose details you'll receive tonight. You have 30 days. He straightened his cuff. I suggest you begin immediately. You'll find your remaining liquidity has been adjusted to reflect the urgency of the situation. He turned then away from Marcus Webb, in the manner of a man completing an errand, and walked to where Sophia stood against the pillar, her jaw already bruising, her eyes very bright and very steady. Behind him, Marcus Webb stood in the ruins of an afternoon that had begun with a signed deal and ended with nothing. No account, no office, no meeting, no name that meant anything in the city he had been so certain he was conquering. Flanked by 2 associates who were already calculating the precise social distance they needed to put between themselves and him before the end of the day. The holiday lights sparkled on, indifferent and beautiful, over all of it. The car door closed and the mall disappeared. That was how it felt, not like driving away, but like a seal completing, the outside world becoming suddenly distant and theoretical, replaced by the quiet interior of dark leather and tinted glass and the low, almost imperceptible hum of an engine built to absorb sound rather than produce it. The partition was up. The city scrolled past the windows in blurred streaks of winter light. Sophia stared at her hands in her lap. She had held herself together through all of it, through the impact, through the marble floor tilting sideways, through Yijun's arrival and the bowing associates and the 4 minutes of watching Marcus's face crumble in real time. She had held herself together with the particular discipline of a woman who had learned, through long and involuntary practice, that public falling apart was a luxury that came with consequences. So she stood straight. She had breathed. She had kept her eyes dry and her jaw, her bruising, throbbing jaw set. In the car, alone with him, with nowhere to perform steadiness for, her hands began to shake. She pressed them flat against her thighs. They shook anyway. Yijun did not immediately speak. He did not reach for her or produce solutions or begin the practical debrief she half expected. The security review, the protocol discussion, the careful inventory of what had gone wrong and how it would be corrected. He simply sat beside her in the gray winter light and let the silence exist without filling it, which was, she had come to understand, one of the most quietly extraordinary things about him. He saw her hands. Of course he did. He reached over and covered them with one of his. Not gripping, not stilling, just the weight of his palm resting over her fingers, present and unhurried, as though he had nowhere else to be and no other purpose in this moment than this. Something in her chest came loose. "I knew," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected and smaller than she intended. "The second I heard his laugh, I knew. And I couldn't just leave, I couldn't just walk away without." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I didn't want him to see me run." "You didn't run," Yijun said. I froze. "You stood your ground in front of a man who has always relied on you flinching." He paused. "That's not freezing. That's something else entirely." She looked at him then for the first time since the car door closed. His face in the winter light was the same face that had crossed a mall corridor without hurrying, that had delivered financial annihilation in a voice calibrated to the temperature of still water. But here, in the 6 inches of space between them on the back seat of an armored car, it was simply the face of the person who knew her. All of her. The woman in the silk sheets who still reached for phantom polyester, and the woman against the pillar who had refused to flinch, and everything in between. "He hit me," she said, and her voice broke cleanly on the last word. Not from weakness but from the sheer accumulated weight of having held it together, and the tears came then, not in collapse but in release, the necessary physical process of a body finally permitted to acknowledge what had happened to it. Yijun moved his arm around her shoulders. She turned into him, her forehead against the wool of his coat, and he held her without speaking because there was nothing to say that the holding didn't already say better. She cried for 3 minutes. She knew it was 3 because she counted her own breathing, the old trick, the one from the Gazuan bathroom and the courthouse steps and every private wreckage she had ever had to reassemble alone. She was not alone now. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. When she stilled, he didn't immediately release her. His hand moved slowly over her hair, her curls, which she had always been quietly self-conscious about in the years when beauty standards had been used against her as a form of control, and he touched them with the same matter-of-fact reverence he brought to everything he considered worth protecting. "The ring," she said quietly after a moment. He waited. She pulled back the sleeve of her dress until the platinum band caught the gray winter light through the window. She looked at it the way she sometimes did when she needed to remember the sequence of events that had led her from there to here. "I almost took it off this morning," she said. "To seem less, I don't know, conspicuous." His hand on her shoulder didn't tighten, but something in the quality of his stillness changed. "I'm glad I didn't," she said. Outside, Seoul moved past them, indifferent and enormous and full of the ordinary machinery of lives being lived. Inside the car, in the 6 inches between them, Sophia let herself be held by the one person in the city who had decided, quietly and completely and without requiring anything from her in return, that she was worth the weight of an empire. 6 weeks later, Sophia stood at the top of a staircase and did not shrink. That was the whole of it, really. That was the victory that no one in the room below would fully understand, because victories of that particular kind are invisible to everyone except the person who spent years practicing the opposite. They would see the gown, ivory silk architectural at the shoulder, a silhouette that made the room's best photographers instinctively raise their cameras. They would see the jewelry, specifically the piece at her collarbone, a commissioned work of platinum and channel-set diamonds that the press would photograph and caption by morning as the Shield of Diamond, because someone on the gala social team had released the name and the story attached to it, and the story was good enough to travel. They would see the hair, her curls full and unrestrained and exactly as they had always been, before the years when she'd flattened them in the hope that smaller meant safer. They would not see the 3 seconds she had stood at the top of the staircase before moving, the 3 seconds in which she had located the phantom, the old pull toward invisibility, the survivor's reflex, the voice that had once been indistinguishable from her own and still occasionally surfaced in the register of a warning, and had looked at it clearly and had chosen with full knowledge of the choice to descend anyway. She descended. The Blue Moon Gala occupied the top 3 floors of a tower in Uedo that the city's architectural press had described, upon its opening, as a building that understood the relationship between height and authority. Tonight it held 400 people, politicians, executives, philanthropists, the particular stratum of Seoul's society that shaped things without always being seen to shape them. The kind of room that Yi-jun moved through like water through existing channels, effortless and inevitable. He was waiting for her at the base of the stairs. Not performing the wait, simply there, in a black suit that required no ornamentation to communicate everything it needed to communicate. His eyes finding her at the top of the staircase and staying there for the duration of her descent with an attention so complete it functioned almost as an escort. She reached him. He offered his arm. She took it. The jaw healed, he said quietly, for only her. Completely, she said. He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary in a room full of people whose business it was to notice things. Then he nodded once and they moved together into the gala. The Blue Moon Foundation was announced at 9 o'clock, between the third course and the fourth, in the way that Sophia had insisted upon. Not as a gala centerpiece, not with a video package and a swell of orchestral music, but plainly, in her own words, at a lectern that she walked to without introduction because she had decided that the work did not require one. She spoke for 7 minutes. She did not tell the full story. The full story belonged to her, and she was learning finally the profound difference between sharing and surrendering. She told me enough. She told me about the courthouse steps and the frozen account and the 4 years of credit repair, and the particular loneliness of being discarded in a city where you don't speak the language well enough to ask for help. She told it without performance, without the tremor of someone still inside the wound, because she was not inside it anymore. She was standing on the other side of it, looking back, building a bridge. The foundation's mandate was simple. No woman navigating abandonment, poverty, or the aftermath of intimate violence in Seoul would face the bureaucratic machinery of survival alone. Legal advocates, financial counselors, housing access, language support. A network assembled from Sophia's own experience of every gap that had nearly swallowed her. The room was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something true is being said in public. When she finished, there was a moment before the applause. A collective breath. The sound of 400 people deciding simultaneously that what they had just heard deserved a beat of silence before response. Then the room rose. Sophia stood at the lectern and received it without deflecting, without the small self-deprecating gesture she would have once used to redistribute the attention away from herself. She let it land. She let herself be seen, fully, without apology, without the compulsive urge to make herself easier to look at by making herself smaller. Yi-jun, seated at the front table, did not applaud. He simply watched her with the expression she had come to recognize as his version of it. Still focused, the particular quality of attention he reserved for the few things in his life he considered extraordinary. Later, near midnight, they stood together at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River. The city spread below them in its cold winter brilliance, and Sophia turned the platinum band slowly on her finger the way she sometimes did when she was thinking. "I used to imagine a life," she said, "where I wasn't afraid of my own history." Yi-jun looked at the river. "And now," he said. She looked at her reflection in the glass. The gown, the diamonds, the curls, the woman inside all of it who had been broken and rebuilt and was still, somehow recognizably herself. More herself, in fact, than she had ever been. The ghost of the Gazawan bathroom was there too, faint and receding, present enough to remind her of the distance traveled. "Now," Sophia said, "I run a foundation with it." The city glittered below them, indifferent and magnificent, and for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, Sophia took up her full amount of space inside it and found that the space fit her exactly. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It is as crazier and more intriguing as I can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe.